TESOL Pop, Season 10, Episode 6. Hello and welcome to TESOL Pop, the mini podcast for busy teachers. My name is Laura, and joining me today to talk about uncovering hidden meaning in our materials is author and teacher trainer Katherine Reilly. In this episode, Katherine talks about the importance of evaluating our materials as a means of fostering an inclusive and supportive classroom. What's more, she shares loads of examples from her experience as an academic, a teacher trainer, and a teacher, so I'm sure there's going to be lots in here that you can relate to. Let's join the conversation where I ask Katherine to tell me more about critical discourse analysis.
Critical discourse analysis, or as we call it CDA in English, language teaching, is an approach that examines how language is used to construct social realities, shape power relations, and influence ideologies. It actually involves analyzing imagery, text, spoken or written, to uncover hidden meanings, assumptions, and power dynamics within them. So, in other words, when we are using critical discourse analysis, we must ask ourselves, do our textbooks or the materials that we have at our disposal, do they reflect different voices, backgrounds, experiences, ethnicity, or gender? The materials that are visual in our textbooks, are they inclusive? So in these cases, we have to try to adapt our teaching materials in such a way that they're more inclusive to all learners, regardless of background. And in some cases, we have to cater not only to their special educational needs, but also to their abilities, so as to foster, a more inclusive learning environment.
You mentioned that it's not just in the images and the resources, but also the words itself. I wonder if you have any examples of texts that you've worked with, without maybe naming authors and publishers, where you've noticed it's reinforcing a particular reality, but not necessarily being inclusive. Do you have an example?
I actually have many examples of such issues. For example, we have many textbooks in which they present professions. Instead of saying police officer, which is more inclusive, they cater to the more stereotypical male profession, policeman. Instead of firefighter, they say fireman, etc. And there are some occupations that they usually associate only with the female gender. For example, why always represent the doctor as male and the nurse as female? I mean, it could be the other way around, simple as that. Or when we are trying to use, vocabulary that in many cases reinforces the stereotypical patriarchy that a man is in charge of a family and he must make the final decision. So I remember there was this listening that was in a book of a known publisher, and I remember they were having dinner. And so the father was like, okay, Scott and I will go to the garden and do some chores. You and mom wash the dishes, he stated to his daughter and his wife. So that was another thing that clicked inside. Mom was like, why? Why couldn't the son help the mother with the dishes? Or why couldn't they work on the car, for example? So there's these little things that imply what the role of each person is in society. And these are the things that, really bother me when it has to do with ELT. Let's not forget that ELT is not only a means of teaching a foreign language, it's also, the values and the mannerisms that we want our students, our children to adapt and adopt later on in life.
Thinking also for those that work with young learners, if with that example of gender roles reinforcement there, that can really taper what learners think is possible for them and what their futures could look like if there's certain stereotypical gender roles being reinforced. I'm thinking about that also as my own experience, as a young person in the 90s when I was in school, and what impact that had on me before I realised that I could have other options in my career. Is that something that you see as particularly problematic in addition to other things?
I can say that that's the most severe issue that we have today in ELT. We are actually, placing our students in specific roles pertaining to their gender or to their that have to do with their nationality or their culture. And these are things that should be, diminished completely. And I'll be more specific. There are some countries that do not accept the voice of women. And this is something that we see frequently, not only in ELT books, but, on social media. There are countries in which, women are not allowed to voice their concerns, their opinions. And we can see that education is a privilege that mostly men, have the benefit. And these are things that we should, try to demolish in any way we can. Some of these ideas and mannerisms are used, within, our textbooks. There's some, sentences that imply what the role of, the male should be in a family, instead of the female. But I remember another text. It was like, I think it was actually a practice test book. It wasn't a course book, in which there was a reading comprehension. And I remember that within the text there were scientists. All of them were male, and this could demolish the dreams of a girl who would wish to follow, medicine or science in the future. And this approach that ELT does today applies to various, ethnic groups, cultures, ideologies. It's not only specific to gender. So we have to stress how important it is to keep an open mind through our teachings, through the materials that are at our disposal.
I think that's so important, Katherine, that you've raised this, and how exclusionary our materials and teaching as a result can be without us even realizing. It can feel quite powerful when you're holding a book that's been assigned to you as a teacher, that's kind of the gospel. I remember as a young teacher starting out and still learning how to teach, when I was given the materials, I hadn't really thought about this because I trusted the publishers and what was written there. And the thought of me being able to adapt it was quite a big jump for me. It wasn't until I gained a lot more confidence in my teaching that I began to kind of realize things that were happening around me and be able to critique things and have the confidence to critique things and change things as well.
You know what the problem is? Okay, my experience as an educator and an author has taught me one thing, that a textbook alone cannot cater to the specific needs of a class. It must be adapted and tailored to the needs of the students. So this is something that we'll talk about, of course. Teachers should not expect to teach based on the book itself upon entering class. And something that they have to keep in mind, many a times we talk about lesson plans. Oh, I have a lesson plan, so I'm going to teach them, the first two exercises from page 2, do the reading on page 3, and then, move on to vocabulary. It doesn't exactly work that way, because a lesson plan is mostly technocratic, if I dare say, with a limited scope. On the other hand, if they apply an educational scenario, which is based on social, communicative, real life circumstances, that they are personal based and are broader and deeper in meaning, in these cases, you can actually pull it off. And this is what we call, adapting your teaching materials to meet the special educational needs or abilities of students. I don't like to use the words good student or bad student or weak student or strong student. There is no such thing as a weak or a strong student. There are students with various abilities. For example, a student might not be good at, rote learning. He might not be good at, learning things by heart. On the other hand, he or she can, actually prevail when it has to do with delivering a speech or a presentation. Other students throughout the years that I've had the honor of teaching were quite fluent and efficient in writing instead of speaking. Everyone can, excel at something. We should not, degrade someone for not being the best at a specific aspect of the language. And that's why it's so important, to offer students various, perspectives of what we teach them, not only culture-wise, but knowledge-wise. And that's why we should, actually, adapt our lessons. And many a time as a teacher trainer, I tell, other teachers, try to use inclusive visual materials. For example, you can have a family that has, a same-sex couple, You can update your libraries with visual material representing the clothing, the mannerisms, festivities of other cultures and countries. You can actually incorporate cultural fairs within the lesson. Have a specific lesson, about the music, food, clothes, or tradition of one of the students. You can have diversity through CLIL lessons or STEAM. Why not talk about a famous gay Japanese inventor and, actually learn the language through this? So the whole idea is to update, your ELT materials in such a way that you can, reflect upon all the students, their experiences, and make them feel that they're part of the lesson and that they are accepted. I think that's the most important, aspect of teaching, fostering an environment of love, inclusion, and motivating them to participate.
That's lovely. Katherine, before we close today's episode, do you have any tips or a top tip you'd like to share for listeners who are thinking, oh, I've really enjoyed this conversation, I want to take action, but what should I do next? What would you say?
Okay, I think that the most important is to follow 2 steps. First step, evaluate the teaching material. Is it inclusive? Does it cater to the students of your class, to all their educational needs or abilities? And the second step is to do your research and try to incorporate all these materials that can actually boost the lesson. And of course, to benefit our kids, because this is the most important part about teaching. It's the welfare of our students.
Wonderful words to close on. Katherine, it's been a delight talking to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was a pleasure.
To learn more about Katherine's work, including blogs and publications and training she delivers, go to her blog space. That's katherinereilly.blog. As always, I've included that link in the show notes so you can find that easily. If you've got a question or an idea that you'd like to pitch to the podcast, then you can go to the website tsopop.com. Finally, you can support the work we do here at TESOL by sharing the episode with your teaching community, by leaving a rating review wherever you listen to the podcast, or by even buying us a coffee by going to ko-fi.com/TESOL